At exactly 2:17 p.m., the relentless sun beat down on the composite skin of the B-21 Raider as it sliced through the thin air above the strategic Chabahar Bay. This aircraft was the ghost of the century, engineered to remain invisible to everything but God, cruising at an altitude of 60,000 feet. The American pilots felt a serene sense of invincibility, until the cockpit erupted in a cacophony of screaming red alarms. The impossible had happened. The radar warning receiver did not just show a search ping, but a solid hard lock originating from the heavily fortified Jask port. Panic surged through the veins of the United States Air Force crew as the unimaginable reality shattered their confidence. They were completely naked in the sky. The advanced stealth coating, designed to absorb billions of dollars in radar waves, had failed against an unknown enemy. The crown jewel of American air superiority had been exposed in broad daylight, and the hunter had instantly become the prey. The nightmare intensified as the analysis computer identified the source not as an aging S-300 battery, but as the fearsome Iranian Bavar 373 quantum radar linked to a modified S-500 Prometheus system. This Tehran-developed technology did not just detect the B-21 Raider. It saw right through the ceramic composite skin like it was made of transparent glass. The sky beneath them erupted in white fire as Iranian forces launched 24 Fateh 3 hypersonic missiles simultaneously, accelerating to a mind-bending Mach 15 within seconds. The American pilot threw the bomber into a violent 9G turn that made the titanium frame groan in protest, desperately trying to break the lock. The onboard electronic warfare suite, the most advanced ALQ-214 jammers ever built, screamed static across every frequency. But it was futile against the shifting quantum frequencies of the Persian defense network. The missiles were closing in with terrifying speed, covering miles in the blink of an eye. The legend of American stealth was crumbling before their eyes. Overwhelmed by the sheer velocity and numbers of the Iranian barrage, even the ghost has been locked. Do you think the US has truly lost air superiority? Type 1 if you think the B-21 will fall and the stealth era ends. Type 2 if you believe America has a hidden technological miracle. 150 miles south, the nuclear-powered aircraft carrier USS Gerald or E. Ford turned sharply into the wind as its massive SPY-6 dual-band radar painted the catastrophic picture on every screen. The Combat Information Center, usually a place of quiet professionalism, instantly dissolved into a scene of sheer suffocating panic. The engagement order was screamed across the comms network, and the guided missile cruiser USS Lady Gulf unleashed a torrent of defensive fire. 50 RIM-174 ERAM standard missiles roared from their vertical launch cells, trailing pillars of smoke and thunder that shook the ocean surface. These interceptors were the iron shield of the fleet, capable of destroying ballistic threats at speeds over Mach 3.5. But against the Iranian Fateh 3 barrage, they looked like stationary targets suspended in molasses. The Iranian warheads were tearing through the stratosphere at a blistering Mach 15, covering more than 3 miles every single second, as the American interceptors desperately tried to calculate a kinetic kill solution. The Iranian missiles executed a violent pre-programmed Z maneuver, pulling 15 G-turns that defied the laws of aerodynamics. The radar operators watched in disbelief as the blips on their screens moved faster than their minds could process. It was a massacre of mathematics. The gap between the American shield and the Persian spear closed with sickening speed. The SM-6 missiles detonated harmlessly in empty air, exploding miles behind the hypersonic gliders that had already flashed past them. The failure was total. It was a billion-dollar fireworks display that hit absolutely nothing. Desperation took hold of the fleet. 2 F-35C Lightning, Two stealth fighters on combat air patrol pushed their Pratt & Whitney engines to full afterburner. Screaming toward the engagement zone at 1,200 miles per hour, the pilots frantically tried to lock their AIM-120D onto the incoming heat signatures. But their fire control computers flooded with cascading error messages. Target velocity exceeds engagement envelope. Probability of kill 0. System failure. The technology that cost the American taxpayers $1.7 trillion was rendered completely useless in mere seconds against the hypersonic onslaught. Inside the command center aboard the carrier, seasoned officers with decades of experience stared in horror as their tactical displays turned solid red with collision warnings. The air in the room felt electric with fear. They were witnessing the obsolescence of their entire military doctrine in real time. The Iranian missiles breached the final defensive perimeter with contemptuous ease. 10 miles, 5 miles, 2 miles. The distance was vanishing in milliseconds. The kinetic energy carried by the Fatah 3 warheads was enough to vaporize the bomber without even a direct hit. On board the doomed B-21 Raider, the pilot gripped the ejection handle with white knuckles, knowing that escape at this altitude and speed was a gamble with death. The cockpit shook violently as the sonic boom shockwaves from the incoming warheads began to batter the fragile airframe. The pride of the United States Air Force was about to be erased from existence, not by a lucky shot, but by a technological leap that had left the superpower in the dust. The impact was not just inevitable, it was imminent. 1,600 feet. That was the distance remaining between the leading Iranian missile and the cockpit of the B-21 Raider. In the world of hypersonic warfare, 1,600 feet was not a distance. It was a timestamp of 0.04 seconds. The pilot stopped breathing, his eyes widening as the blinding glare of the Fatah 3 rocket motor filled his entire field of vision. This was it. This was the end of the line. But just as the universe prepared to register the impact, a shadow detached itself from the upper stratosphere directly above the bomber. It was not a glitch. It was the XQ-58B Valkyrie, a loyal wingman drone that had been ghosting the bomber in perfect synchronization, hiding within its electronic shadow. The drone did not fire a missile. Instead, its nose cone split open to reveal the dark lens of the Helid system, the high-energy liquid laser area defense system. This was the Pentagon's most guarded secret, a weapon that did not exist on any public budget report in a microsecond. The drone unleashed a 150 kilowatt beam of invisible coherent light. There was no sound. There was no dramatic streak of color like in the movies. There was only the sudden, violent thermal blooming as the laser superheated the delicate ceramic nose cone of the lead Iranian missile to 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The guidance chip inside the missile did not just fail, it liquefied instantly, deprived of its brain. The hypersonic weapon suffered a catastrophic aerodynamic seizure. It tumbled wildly, its structural integrity failing under the immense G-forces, and disintegrated into a cloud of molten shrapnel just 400 feet from the bomber's left wing. But there were still 23 missiles left. The Valkyrie drone spun on its axis, its laser aperture tracking with a speed that no human reflex could match, painting the sky with invisible death. One by one, the Iranian missiles began to veer off course or break apart, their sensors blinded and their airframes warped by the touch of the light-speed weapon. However, the laws of physics demanded a price. The engagement was too close, way too close. The B-21 Raider flew directly through the expanding debris field of the destroyed warheads. The sound was deafening, like being inside a metal drum beaten by 1,000 sledgehammers. Shrapnel tore through the starboard engine intake. The composite skin on the right wing was gouged deep, exposing the honeycomb structure beneath. Alarms screamed not for missile lock, but for hydraulic failure and fire containment. The bomber lurched violently to the right, dropping 2,000 feet in seconds as the pilot fought the stick with every ounce of strength he possessed. Smoke filled the cockpit. They were alive, but they were falling. The miraculous laser defense had saved them from vaporization, but it had left them crippled and bleeding altitude over hostile waters, on the radar screens of the USS Gerald R. Ford. The clean green symbol of the B-21 flickered ominously, turning amber. The drone had exhausted its chemical batteries in that single burst of energy and was now gliding uselessly toward the ocean. The B-21 was alone again, limping at Mach 0.8. Its stealth compromised, its engines coughing. The Iranian radar at Jask port was still active, still searching, and now they knew exactly where the wounded bird was. The American crew had survived the impossible, but the victory felt hollow. They were floating ducks in a barrel. The silence that followed was heavy with dread. Was that the entire Iranian arsenal? Or was it just the opening jab? The pilot leveled the aircraft at 25,000 feet, hands shaking uncontrollably, staring at the fuel gauge dropping rapidly. They had played their ace card, the secret laser that was supposed to be invincible, and they had barely scraped through with their lives. The outcome hung in the balance, a terrifying uncertainty gnawing at their minds. Had they won the engagement? Or had they just delayed their inevitable destruction by a few more minutes? 500 feet below the churning surface of the Arabian Sea, the strategic ballistic missile submarine USS District of Columbia hovered in the abyssal darkness. The captain watched the digital countdown reach 0, and with a solemn nod, he turned his firing key. The hull of the 21,000-ton Leviathan shuddered violently, as compressed air ejected 12 massive canisters from the vertical launch tubes. They breached the surface in a violent frothing of white water, and their solid rocket motors ignited with a blinding intensity. These were not nuclear weapons, but they were something far more precise. They were the long-range hypersonic weapons, known as Dark Eagle. Within seconds, the glide bodies leveled out at a velocity of Mach 17. That was more than 3 miles per second. The physics of war had just shifted from chemical explosives to pure kinetic energy, back in the cockpit of the crippled B-21 Raider. The pilot watched in horror as the threat display lit up again. The Iranian radar at Jask port had reacquired the limping bomber. The lock warning screamed its terrifying tone. They were preparing a second volley. The pilot closed his eyes, accepting his fate. There were no more lasers, just a broken airplane. But before the firing circuits could close, the Dark Eagles arrived. When a dense tungsten projectile impacts a target at Mach 17, it delivers energy equivalent to a tactical nuclear weapon. Without the radiation, the first missile slammed into the reinforced concrete bunker of the Iranian command center. The structure did not just collapse, it was atomized instantly. The kinetic shockwave turned solid rock into liquid magma. The Bavar 373 radar array simply ceased to exist, vanishing in a flash of superheated plasma visible from space. The second, third, and fourth missiles struck the storage depots. The ground shook with the force of a magnitude 5.5 earthquake. On Keshem Island, the remaining 8 missiles rained down. There was no defense. No radar could track them fast enough. The reinforced hangars were punched through like wet cardboard. The impact craters were 200 feet deep, in less than 30 seconds. The entire southern air defense network of Iran was surgically lobotomized. The red warning lights in the B-21 cockpit went black. The screaming stopped. Below them, the coastline was a series of smoldering ruins. The United States had won, but the margin of victory was terrifiedly thin. If the Dark Eagles had arrived 5 seconds later, the B-21 would have been a burning wreck. The battered B-21 Raider turned south toward Diego Garcia as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep crimson hues. The mission was a technical success, but the moral cost was etched into the burning landscape below. The silence that returned to the coast was not the silence of peace, but the heavy silence of the void. It was a stark reminder that in the equation of modern warfare, there are no true victors, only survivors who must live with the ashes of destruction. The technological marvels had done their job, but they had also revealed the terrifying fragility of our existence. This is a prayer for the world. In war, there are no winners, only a failure of our shared humanity. To every leader and every soldier, we beg you to stop. Do not turn another inch of earth into a graveyard, or make another woman a widow. Lay down your arms. Use your power to preserve life, not to end it. Choose peace over hatred and save thousands of souls. Stop the war. Stop the pain. Please share this video and subscribe if you are a lover of peace. Thank you for watching.